It's my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Lilian Pintea, the Vice President of Conservation Science at the Jane Goodall Institute. But first, a little bit about him. Dr. Pintea brings more than 25 years of experience in using geospatial technologies to the job for conserving chimpanzees, other wildlife, and their vanishing habitats. Lilian oversees all science activities and functions at the Institute, supporting departments and country offices. He brings targeted research, analysis, and technological innovation to support JGI's mission. Lilian is passionate about unlocking the potential of science and innovation technologies to address what he calls the last mile challenges in conservation, or where the local people make daily choices and decisions that impact the environment. He works closely with local communities, villages, national governments, academia, other NGOs, and JGI staff throughout Africa. Together, they work to adapt and build capacity to integrate science and technology with local solutions and decision-making processes. They tackle some of the hardest challenges in conservation, natural resource management, and climate change. Recognized as a pioneer in applying innovative spatial technologies to conservation, Dr. Pintea has presented invited talks at numerous conferences. Lilian holds a PhD in conservation biology from the University of Minnesota and an MS in zoology from Moscow State University in Russia. He's a former MacArthur Scholar of the Interdisciplinary Program on Global Change, Sustainability, and Justice at the University of Minnesota. He's a former Fulbright Scholar at the Center of Remote Sensing at the University of Delaware, and a former UNESCO Cousteau Fellow in Ecotechny at the University of Bucharest in Romania. With frequent trips to sub-Saharan Africa, Lilian lives in Silver Spring, Maryland, here in the United States. And it's with that it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Pintea. Sir, please take it away.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to join you today. A few words about myself. I'm working with the Jane Goodall Institute as the Vice President of Conservation Science. I'm based here in Washington, DC, and I'm a conservation biologist with a PhD from University of Minnesota. I've been working in sub-Saharan Africa since 1997, and I have more than 25 years of experience in applying and using geospatial technologies with the local communities and local governments. The last 20 years, I've been privileged to work with Dr. Jane Goodall and JGI colleagues, local communities, and governments across Africa, mostly in Tanzania, Uganda, DRC, and other countries. So the Jane Goodall Institute vision is a healthy planet where people make compassionate choices to live sustainably. And our mission is to protect, understand chimpanzees and their habitats, and create an informed and compassionate critical mass of people. I want to talk today with you about Tacare, our community-driven conservation approach. If you take a boat to Gombe, the last village before getting to Gombe is Ntanga. When I first took this trip to Gombe 20 years ago, I was shocked by the extent of deforestation outside the park compared to similar hills inside Gombe. I was wondering how those changes in tree cover could impact people, animals, and the environment. Now, one night in 2001, a terrible flash flood started just behind these hills. I was in Gombe at the time with Jane when we heard the news of the flash flood. In the morning, my colleague, Dr. Shadrach Kamenia, at the time director of chimpanzee research at Gombe, and I visited Ntanga to assess, map the impact, and see how we might be able to help. What we found was a community in shock and a landscape transformed overnight with deep erosions along this little stream called Kizuka, but with large trees unrooted and boulders scattered like a giant threw them across the valley. When Dr. Shadrach Kamenia asked what happened, the answer from the community was clear. Well, you see, spirits live in the trees behind those hills. And they got angry because we cut their trees. In the middle of the night, they started drumming and created this flood. Encouraged by the connection of the floods with the trees, we asked if it might be a good idea to let these trees regenerate to please the spirits in the future. The answer was disappointing. No, the spirits are gone. That's what they do. They make a mess and leave. There are no spirits left in those hills. Shadrach and I left that day concerned about how Mtanga and other communities adjacent to Gombe will cope with other disasters that might come from loss of ecosystem services as a result of incompatible farming and exacerbated by the climate change. After all, the climate change models for the region predict more extreme events such as flash floods. However, what Mtanga and other local communities around Gombe managed to achieve in the next 20 years in partnership with the Jane Goodall Institute, local governments, and other partners changed my view on conservation and how to build resilience in our social and ecological systems. And it also gave me hope. If you look at the historical aerial photos from 1958, you could see that with except few natural high elevation mountain grassland patches, most of the Mtanga village area was covered in Miombo woodlands. You cannot see the difference between inside and outside of what is now Gombe National Park. Now, the first high-resolution Icono satellite imagery taken just before the flash floods showed that by 2001, most of these woodlands were gone. And we could see a striking contrast between Gombe and outside the park. That first Icono satellite image helped us develop a common language and engage in a geodesign process with the local communities by starting a dialogue with global audience as well, through maps like this one published by the National Geographic in 2003, to bringing these maps to Mtanga and other communities as part of the Tacare process. We can use now the same high-resolution imagery, this time from Maxar, to see that Mtanga community decided to restore their watersheds, and many steep woodlands are showing signs of reforestation. So how conservation initiatives could motivate and empower other local communities to take control of their own landscapes, and like Mtanga, improve their environment. This year, we continue to celebrate 60 years of research at Gombe. I encourage you to check our Gombe 60 story map and learn more about some of those discoveries. Gombe was also the first program back in 2000 where we started to use GIS and remote sensing. It helped us put chimpanzee behavior and habitat needs and human land uses on the same map. I encourage you to go to this web map and see how chimpanzee community home ranges changed over the years, as you could see in this animation, and how it helped us understand chimpanzee conservation needs inside and outside the park boundaries. In addition to her pioneering discoveries, like the chimpanzee use tools that led famous paleoanthropologist Louis Leakey to send this telegram saying, well, now we must redefine tool, redefine man, or accept chimpanzees as humans, Dr. Jane Goodall also developed strong relationships with local communities, valuing their traditional knowledge, and involving them in research right from the beginning. In the words of Mama Fatuma Kifimu, Jane would ask her husband how to find these chimpanzees. what do they eat, and then disappear into the forest from morning to evening. This created a foundation that became later GGI's approach to science and conservation. That connects, and it is interwoven with the people of the place. One of the first programs that was created was Gombe Stream Research Center. It was founded in 1965, and it is now the longest running field research on chimpanzees with its own Guinness record. It remains a world-class research station with most of the data collected by generations of field researchers from the neighboring communities. One of them is Mr. Jumani Kikwale. He's the third from the right. And his relationship with Gombe goes way, and Jane's go way back. He was the boy in the National Geographic who was very gladly receiving some medications from Jane. A few years later, Mr. Kikwale also played an important role in creating the first Roots and Shoots club in Tanzania. Roots and Shoots is one of the fastest growing programs at the Jane Goodall Institute, and now it's in 68 countries. Then in 1992, Jane had a chance to fly over Gombe, and she realized that Gombe is surrounded by an ocean of farms and settlements. But because of her connection to the chimps, to people, she realized that there is no way we can even save those chimps without addressing the root causes, which is poverty and livelihood needs. And this has started the Lake Tanganyika Catchment Reforestation and Education, or Tacare project, since back in 1994. It focused first around the Gombe in the historical chimpanzee ranges. It worked with 13 villages. But because 91% of the chimpanzee range in Tanzania is outside national parks, this approach expanded from Gombe in 1960 to Greater Gombe in 1994, and now, thanks to USAID, it's covering 104 villages, covering 31% of the chimpanzee range, which has been set up aside as village land use plan, as village forest reserves and district forest reserves. And recently, this area became a UNESCO Man and Biosphere Reserve. So what started with 12 villages, now, thanks to USAID, it covers 104 villages, and over the years, more than 500,000 hectares of new protected areas were set up at the village and district levels, which is roughly around 31% of the chimpanzee range in Tanzania. The area became internationally recognized as the UNESCO Man and Biosphere Reserve. In some ways, what's happening to Gombe is a microcosm to what is happening to many other forests and local communities around the world. We have 80% of the global biodiversity and much land in the hands of local communities. And like in Gombe, many of these local communities are struggling with poverty, social and economic injustices, struggling to have their voices heard, and now also to cope with climate change. Therefore, the key question remains: how could conservation initiatives motivate and empower the greatest number of local people, like this smallholder forest owner from Western Uganda, so they can take control of their own landscapes and harmonize their own development needs with a better balance between people, animals, and the environment? Well, thanks to a generous support from Jack and Laura Dangermond and Esri team, we are working on the Tacare book to be published by Esri Press this year, with contributions from many original Tacare project staff. Last year, just before we all got grounded, we managed to get together in January in Kigoma, in Tanzania. And we have been working with the Esri team developing a set of apps that can help organizations like Jane Goodall Institute scale Tacare and better support collaboration with local communities, including project management tools and citizen science applications. It currently includes these 4 workflows: gathering community context, mapping stakeholders, sketching community maps, and submitting observations. And all of this came at a great time for the Jane Goodall Institute, because the Institute is investing in an integrated science strategy that will bring it all together to its original roots. From Gombe research to Tacare to Roots and Shoots program, by leveraging science through participatory research, innovative technologies in storytelling, and geospatial technologies in geography. And the key role in bringing this all together is geography and applying geospatial technologies with the people of the place. So at the most broad level, Tacare and geodesign share a common purpose, is to design and facilitate life and health for people, animals, and the environment. Tacare is not a typical conservation approach. It is an approach where conservation, it's almost not the objective. The conservation is the result of development that takes nature into consideration. To achieve that, Tacare focuses on ownership. Tacare starts with proper engagement, but does not end there, making sure that local communities own and drive the decisions on their own lands. This goal is shared, of course, with the geodesign, focusing on the people of the place. Now, this could be as simple as an invitation by the local communities to partner with us, or us approaching a community and starting a dialogue. But if the community is not ready, we step back. It can take years until community might be ready and is interested to move to the next stage. So Tacare builds on active listening, engaging both hearts and minds with compassion. Like geodesign, Tacare recognizes that people have been adapting and surviving and designing since the beginning of time, using local knowledge. For example, in Bitale village is an inland village east of Gombe, and you can see those hills of Gombe here in the distance. It has a very different topography and land use than Tanga. While the community does not have a one large forest, it does have many smallholders, private forest owners, more than 80 of them, that have these small forest patches. We had a chance to engage them in a geodesign process and facilitate and record their knowledge. And you could see them how happy they are to find and record and show the progress on the forest. Here is one forest improving. This is another 2005, 2018. And one of the largest forests, which also shows signs of improvement, and also have been very well monitored by the Village Forest Monitor with Survey 123, was this one. One of the largest private forest reserves that still existed in 2005, but improved, was a very well monitored by the Village Forest Monitor, selected by the village government, and equipped and trained by JGI to use Survey 123 and smartphone to monitor wildlife and human activities in the forest. You can see this data reported by the Forest Monitor on this web map. You can zoom in and see this monitoring activities. So we can see the data reported by the Forest Monitor on this web map. Thanks to satellite imageries, we had a chance to share the imagery and listened to the elders and the local communities and private forest owners. We learned that while this forest patch is fragmented and it's private, it's actually very much connected and contributing to the community, to the forest, knowledge passed from generations to generations. The forest is a source of local medicine, like this bark that has been drying in a basket. When a community decided to set up a beehive association, they needed a forest, and the owners of the forest allowed them to place these beehives at a symbolic rental price. And we also learned that in addition to Survey 123, mobile and mobile apps, the village forest monitor has been using some other help. It turned out that he was trained by his great uncle and developed a relation with 5 path adders, like this one. He has been bringing them maize, flour, and other offerings, and in return, he told us that they help him protect his forest. Now, we might say that path adders do not care about maize flour, but it might attract mice. That is a favorite food source for path adders. The truth is that we don't know, but for me, it was an important reminder to stay open and listen, and the usefulness of community mapping and the geodesign process in capturing and listening and capturing that knowledge. Like geodesign, Tacare project uses geography and geospatial technologies to combine local knowledge and scientific data and expertise to develop a common understanding of how ecosystems are structured and function. What are the needs of the animals, people, and the environment, and what are the major problems and what can be done about it? Now, in early days of Tacare, we learned that this process is really working, but people care about the access to clean water. They care about food, health, education, cash, and job opportunities. And they didn't really represent it or care so much about chimpanzees or the environmental needs. We realized that we need to engage another approach. And we engaged a participatory planning, conservation planning approach using open standards for the practice of conservation to provide those insights and inputs into the geodesign process. So in this way, we're able to better connect what people care about with what ecosystems need to proper function to support not only chimpanzees and other wildlife, but broader ecosystem services in order to support those development needs. For example, Kigali village is another community that experienced a landslide before the flood in Tonga. You can see the landslide here on the right. It destroyed a couple of houses, and you can see the eroded streams. Unlike in Tonga, GGI supported Kigali by contributing imagery, data, resources, and tools to go through a conservation action planning process and land use planning process that identified a village forest reserve, shown here in green boundary, where if restored, it can bring back healthy forest streams and stabilize watersheds. And you could see from this recent image that they did an amazing job. And a few years ago, we had a chance to share this imagery before and after with the local communities in Kigali. One woman pointed to us that before the forest reserve, she used to have a farm very close to her house. And now she needs to walk an extra hour on steep terrain to reach her farm. Of course, I asked if it was worth to set up the village forest reserves. 1 hour on a steep terrain, that seems like a lot of work. She pointed to a building near a large mango tree. You see, she said, this is a school. One day, a flood almost destroyed that school. I had 2 children at that time in that school. I better walk extra hour a day, but no. that my children are safe. Geodesign and conservation action planning helped us understand, plan, and spatially connect chimpanzee objectives and habitat needs with basic community needs, like this woman's need for improving security from those floods. And those geodesign and planning tools have been helping us to get those plans implemented, like equipping forest monitors, like the forest monitor from Kigali, with mobile devices in Survey 123. But what was critical was that after all the planning and analysis and data, the village government went to each of the farm in the new reserves and convinced them to move their farms to other areas in order to let trees come back and benefit the entire community. And now people are also benefiting from collecting and selling mushrooms, having access to clean water and other wood products from the forest. While we can look at the entire Tacare process and see them as a step-by-step approach, it seems it's actually more of a web of feedback loops that are guided by the goal to design for life. Kigali resilience increased not only because of science and planning, but mostly importantly from the community connection and commitment to work together and to collaborate to address a common problem. And building on this and lessons learned and data, we put together a new project called Gombe One Health Hub that is bringing all this data and tools together from houses, mapped and vegetation from researchers at Maxar, with wildlife data from the local communities, and with Gombe long-term research to show how the health of wildlife, people, and the environment are connected and should be managed as part of One Health approach. I think we all agree that the world is facing unprecedented challenges. Scientists warn that if we continue to ignore the causes of zoonotic diseases, such as intrusive destruction of natural habitats around the globe, bushmeat and wildlife trafficking, and cruel factory farming and wet markets, we may be infected with viruses like this, causing pandemics even more disruptive than COVID-19. I want to leave you with one of Jane's statements, that we need to connect our brains with our hearts and appropriately use our indigenous knowledge, as well as our science and our innovative technologies, to make wiser decisions about people, animals, and our shared environment. When I look back at the landscapes of Ntanga, Kigali, and other villages around Gombe, I'm not sure if the spirits decided to come back, but I do see communities better connected to each other and to their own environment. And this maybe is the essence of our resilience that we might want to see more and more spinning around the globe in all other areas where local communities, facilitated by approaches like Tacare and fueled by proper use of space and geospatial technologies through geodesign, can achieve such amazing transformations. Thank you for your attention and for inviting me to share with you this work. Lots of thanks to our partners, USAID, Esri, Maxar, and other partners who helped us over the years work with local communities and apply these incredible technologies, not for the people, but with the people, to address some of these incredible challenges. Thank you.